Well, here we are in the change of seasons. We are going from wintertime to springtime. I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Holcomb, along with meteorologist Danielle and meteorologist Melissa Nord, and welcome to this Weather Impact Extra, where we're just going to chat about what we're seeing as we change the season here from wintertime to springtime. And as meteorologists, we already feel like we're in spring because springtime for us is meteorological spring, which starts on March 1st. But astronomical spring starts on March 20th when it is the vernal equinox. Do y'all have any preferences versus the real equinox versus meteorological spring beginning?
I think the actual warmer temperatures start coming in,
Yeah.
you know, but March 1st is still like, yes, winter's almost over.
I agree, especially when you've had cold winters or a lot of snow like we did this winter. It's like March 1st hits and you're like, oh, thank you. Not excited for pollen, but excited for the warm up coming.
Exactly.
And it's easier when you divide it by months instead of
That's right.
seasons,
Yeah.
you know? So in a sense, meteorological spring is an easier thing to talk about than astronomical.
And I think that's why the meteorological spring is set up that way, because it is for in record keeping. It's so much easier to say the entire month of March rather than just a few days of March, the last 10 days or so of March when you're talking about when springtime begins. So we have a lot to talk about today. We want to talk about what we see typically as we move into the springtime, and then also what is forecast in the springtime. We also know we have to deal with pollen in the springtime. Mm-hmm. We're also dealing with spring storms in the springtime too. So we're just going to chat a little while about what we do see when we're out there. So first, let's talk about those average highs. This is a trend that I like when we see these temperatures warming up. What do you think?
Yes.
Well, and it's the average, so it's based on 30 years of data. We can get warm spells, we can get cold spells. Like we saw in February, we had warm snaps, cold snaps, and we're going to see exactly that moving through March as well. But the average high starts at the start of the month, only in the low 60s, but by April 1st, look at that. It is 70 degrees, the average high, and then really by the end of April, you're looking ahead to summer-like temperatures.
And then, of course, we see that warming not only in the afternoons, but also the average lows coming up. And then this is where it gets tricky, though, because as you said, these are just averages and the trends, but we often see those dips that will come in even as we get into April. Yeah. Sometimes we see a late freeze that could move in too, but this is the general trend that we see here with these temperatures starting off at 40 degrees in the mornings, and then June 1st. That's not bad. When we see those morning lows go into the 60s, and we can say so long to those cold mornings, right?
Yeah,
Danielle?
and that's exactly why sometimes we get that severe weather threat, because the temperature differences. It's like, oh, we're getting closer to spring, we're getting too close to summer, and the clashing of the air masses just creates that strong front. And, you know, you're like, wow, the average already 64 degrees. But like you said, you don't see it all the time. It's not going to be every day at 64, but it's nice to have that little bit of a break and a little bit of a reminder, too, that we're not quite done with winter just yet.
Exactly.
But you know, it does feel nice to see the slow and steady trend to the 80s.
And it's those late season cold snaps that, number one, kind of catch some people off guard, but number two, the plants are also a little bit confused.
Right. Exactly.
There's been some historic recent late March freezes that have, for example, I think it was it 21 or 22 in March, there was a freeze that took out a lot of the peach blossoms from the peach trees, and that hurt the peach crops in Georgia. So we always have to watch out for those when you're thinking about early spring planting as well. Plant things right now that are tolerable, a little more tolerable to the cold, and wait until we get into April to start planting those less cold tolerant plants.
And when you're dealing with talking about averages, that's when you have the smooth line. But in reality, there will be some ups and then downs, and then more ups and downs. And that's really what I try to tell people when they're asking me, are we finished yet? Can I plant yet? And we're going to talk more about planting coming up in just a little bit. But I always say, we are trending up. We're going to begin to see more warm days than cold, but we're not quite finished with the cold. There'll be fewer and fewer cold days, but we still have a chance to see some of those cold days that'll be moving in. And that leads us into not only talking about averages, but looking ahead to the future. And we get outlooks from NOAA about what we can expect for the future. And I am always a little hesitant when we talk about outlooks because people want a simple yes or no, warmer, hotter, you know, whatever. Right. But again, with these outlooks, we're talking about trends and the likelihood that temperatures could be colder than average or warmer than average. And this is what we're seeing with this right now, Melissa.
Yeah, and it shows that through the months of, so we're talking about March, April, and May being meteorological spring. You see in the orange color, that means these are your odds. Is it likely going to be warmer than average? Is it likely going to be cooler than average? And when we see that orange color across Georgia, that means likely warmer than average as a whole. So that's combining the whole 3 months, averaging everything out. It's probably warmer than average, but we can certainly see cold snaps within that.
And we are talking again about averages here. A lot of times people say, wait, it might dip down into the 30s, and then they may say, but wait, you said it was going to be warmer than average. That doesn't mean it's going to be warmer than average every single day. We're talking about for this 3-month period, on average, if you take those temperatures every single day, then yes, it will be a little bit warmer than what we are on an average day. Let's move ahead, and we can look at what we're talking about with planting. I have to tell you, this time of year, that is the question I get asked most often. And not only about plants too, but even like people who have water features in their backyard, the little koi ponds and stuff, about making sure, if they can kind of get those going back again in the fountains or whatever in their backyard. There's so many things that are impacted by temperature. So when can we plant, Danielle? What do you think?
It's always good to remember these dates because you kind of get caught up in the, it's warm outside, let's just go ahead and plant something, especially like on a Saturday or a Sunday. You might have the time off. It might feel great into the 60s, but then you could have a really hard freeze that could come just a few days later. So you really have to wait and just use your patience. Don't get too excited just yet because you don't want to lose that crop either. Or even just like your flowers. You want to go out to Home Depot and spend all the money and buy all these great things to go in the yard, and then boom, they're dead.
All that work, too.
Yes, all that work gone to waste, roses, all things like that. So you also want to make sure that you're paying attention to what kind of, like you said earlier, what kind of plants that you are purchasing and that you are putting into your yard, because that plays a big deal on when you can plant. If you look on the back of those seeds, sometimes they tell you, like, okay, this is good to plant through these months. And then you're like, wow, that's a long time. But when you think about it, it could happen with that cold freeze.
It can.
Yeah.
And so the general good reminder in Atlanta is to wait until tax day, but that's like being very conservative.
It is, yeah.
Because, we haven't seen freezes in April at the airport in quite some time. Our average last freeze, which is when we get down to 32 degrees, is about March 21st. But even beyond that, we had a couple years ago, we got down to the mid 30s, and it was late in March when it got down that cold. So we generally say wait until tax day, at least past the first week of April, just to be super safe. But in the meantime, pansies are a good variety.
Yes.
Violas.
At least April 15th is when we feel more confident about it, that, if people are talking about spending money and working really hard in their yards and they want to have a little more confidence that their plants won't get damaged or they won't waste their time there, at least April 15th is the best thing. The latest ever last freeze, this is very interesting, it can happen. It can happen after April 25th, and it has happened. It was back in 1910.
Before all the buildings, Chris. There were no skyscrapers in the city then.
Yeah.
But
so
yes, it can.
It could happen, but at least we feel better about telling people to get the stuff planted. Just wait, because we are anxious. We want to get out there, and it's actually sometimes it is a lot of work, but it's kind of fun to get out and do all the planting and get excited about what's going to be coming up. So. But it doesn't hurt you to wait a little bit longer. Of course, I want my flowers to look better before everybody else's, right? But then all the other people are going to be laughing at you when they all start wilting and get damaged, right?
But if we do get a cold snap, one of those cold snaps, the good thing is we already know in like early March, if it's going to get that cold, or mid-March, they'll put out these frost advisories, freeze warnings, and then that's kind of your light bulb in the head that goes off where you say, okay, I need to cover these plants up or bring them inside. So we're going to alert you if that's coming in, a late spring freeze or a frost. We'll let you know if you've really got to watch those plants that you planted a little bit earlier than tax day.
And talking about enjoying plants and enjoying the blossoms and blooms and trees, it is so beautiful, but to others, even though it's pretty, it really impacts their life in a bad way, and that is because of pollen. And this is the time of year when we are getting into that pollen that's going to start ramping up. We have already seen some warm days that has given us some high pollen counts, in the 5s and 600s, but we tell people, yeah, even though that looks like it is in the high range, it's nothing compared to the pollen count in the thousands that we're going to be seeing too. So it starts in February and peaks around April 1st. The pine pollen, the yellow pollen that we see, is part of the issues that we have out there as far as covering our cars and our outdoor furniture and everything. But the pine pollen that we see is actually, I don't want to say too big, but it's not as much of an irritant as the other hardwoods that we see out there that cause the issues.
It's some of the other trees, your maple, your sycamore trees, all of those that you see on our daily pollen outlooks that we put out. And those are the ones that generally your body's responding to more. So if you're suffering from allergies, like many people do this time of year, if you haven't already, start the nasal sprays, start the antihistamines, and hang in there, buckle up. Those numbers can get pretty high.
Yes, they can, especially here in the South, because the great pollinating happens.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, and even if you don't see it on your cars, a lot of people wait so they start to see it kind of collect on your car. Don't wait then, because you already know that it's coming. So try to, be proactive. We talk to allergists all the time about, how can we help our viewers kind of stay ahead of pollen season and allergy season. And it's really one of those things that it never really ends, So the more pollen you see, just be prepared. We always tell people, I feel like that's our favorite phrase, be prepared.
Exactly, that's right.
But you should, because that pollen count is going to really skyrocket as we head into mid-March.
And the trend historically that we've seen is really the last week of March, beginning of April. I always remember that beginning of April because that's a lot of times when we have the spring break for the state of Georgia, usually that first week. One year we went out of town, came home, the pollen wasn't bad where we went. We came home and the car that was not on vacation with us was just covered in pollen because that week it was just so crazy. So let's take a look at some of these records that we have. And we've been talking about so far this year, we've had pollen counts in the hundreds. Yeah, that's high. But look at this.
Yeah.
Back in 2012, the highest on record, 9,369. And that is the amount of pollen particles in a cubic meter of air. So we're talking about 9,000 of those in a cubic meter of air, and you're just breathing all that in. Look at these others. In the 8,000s in 2020, 2024, 8740, just April 2nd last year, 8165 in 2012, and in 2013, 8021. So the trend that you see here, generally the end of March, beginning of April, when we have these highest counts out there.
And it's usually, that few week period where we're consistently getting at least 3 or 4 days a week, depending on the weather, some of those counts above 2,000. And then really you have a couple days that just stand out each year that are like your peak. And even if you're not an allergy sufferer, you're like, oh my God, why am I itchy? Why am I sneezing? So these are some of our highest numbers, but we generally see, I would say, over half a dozen counts above 2,000 each and every year as we get that peak of pollen season in here. And
it all depends too on your allergen. You may be fine on a day when we're at 7,000 or 8,000 for the pollen count, and your allergen may not be included in that count on that day, even though it's covering up the cars and everything. But we could have a day where the pollen count is at 400, but all of those particulates might be, let's say, maple or oak that you might be allergic to, and you might have a worse day that day than you do on the day when it's in the thousands. So the rain helps us when we have that pollen. It helps to wash things out a little bit. So take a look at the spring rainfall. These are the climate normals in the Atlanta area. And March, we see a little more rain.
Yeah, it kind of is bleeding over from the winter months when we have a lot more active weather. We can see repeated rounds of heavy rainfall. So that's our highest rainfall average out of meteorological spring.
Yes, exactly. And whenever we have these big rain events, most of them are coming in the form of a cold front. And we were talking about allergies. That really helps with some of that relief, a short period of relief, but any kind of rainfall that we get in the spring really helps people that are suffering with those allergies. Unfortunately, sometimes it can come with severe weather.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And looking out at severe weather, we look several days in the future to see, is heavy rain one of those components? Is it strong winds? Is it going to be the chance of tornadoes? But the the risk of rain, the amount of rain we see on average, starts to taper off a little bit as we trend further away from that spring severe weather season and more towards May, which gets almost into that summer-like pattern.
When those counts or numbers are even lower going into the summer months too. So this is our outlook for the springtime, what the National Weather Service is thinking. And you don't really see us in the above or wetter or drier component. It's likely going to be average. Now, this is always tricky when we're talking about this. Equal chances of being above versus below average or below normal. And that's just how they do this. So really, we could kind of think that we're most likely are going to get near average rainfall as we go through the springtime months.
Flip a coin.
Yes.
Exactly.
You'll get some rainy weeks, you'll get some dry weeks.
Yeah. So based on both of those, we are seeing that for the springtime months, we're thinking that temperatures will likely be above average for the 3-month period. And based on what we're seeing right now, the averages for precipitation should be close to average. So as we're talking about rain coming in, then that is the other big headline, the other big question that we get asked all the time. When are we going to have severe weather? And then if we are going to have severe weather, what type of severe weather are we going to have? Is it going to be just heavy rain with thunder and lightning? Is it going to be strong winds? Or do we have the potential for tornadoes? And of course, these are the 3 months where it's most likely here in our area. And it's a difficult thing sometimes because people think you just look at radar and just say, oh, look at that line, storm's coming in. Yeah, it's going to turn severe. There is so much more that we look at. And we actually have to dissect the atmosphere to look at these 4 main things. What do you think about shear?
And Chris, I mean, you've been forecasting here in North Georgia for many decades, and it's like you're looking at the ingredients to make a cake. Are they going to come together? And think of these as like our 4 main ingredients we look at to bake our cake of severe weather. So the first one is shear. We can have 2 different types of shear. It can be changing of wind speed with height, so stronger up in the atmosphere, you get some really strong winds going in the same direction. Or it can also be directional shear, where we have winds at the surface coming out of one direction and they change directions, maybe coming more out of the west, a little bit above the surface. And that's one of the key components to see if we're going to have thunderstorms that can rotate. And that brings in the tornado component for us.
And that also, when you're talking about those different levels, you hear people sometimes on social media, if you're reading things about stuff coming up, and they'll talk about jet streaks being at this many miles per hour. And that also has to do with that speed of the winds and the direction of the winds too.
Right, exactly. There's so many different components that you have to look for in severe weather, and I feel like spring severe weather season, you get the opportunity to have the most severe weather modes just because it is so, unstable outside. I feel like for my career, not as long as Chris is obviously, but you start to see how the atmosphere kind of reacts to those fronts that are coming in and the different ingredients that are there. And a lot of times people don't realize how much time we have to put into those forecasts. You could see outlooks 7 days out and you could watch that system kind of come in day by day. How is, things shaping up? Where is the line going to set up? Where is the squall line coming through? You have to look at all of this stuff and those ingredients to see if you're going to have, like you said, a good cake of severe weather.
And most of the time in spring, it's not these garden variety pop-ups. It is a front, and that's kind of our lifting mechanism, Chris, to bring those clouds upwards, force them into kind of a line of clouds and sometimes line of thunderstorms.
And that a lot of times is that dividing air when you have a cold front between the warm, humid air up ahead of it and the colder and drier air back behind it. And it's that clash of those air masses where we see that lift. It's a parcel of air, or a large parcel of air within a front, that is able to be lifted up. And as that air goes up and the clouds get taller and taller, cumulonimbus clouds develop there, that's where we get some of those strong storms that develop there ahead of and along the actual front. Also, instability is very important too.
Yeah, and that's one of those kind of rising air facets as well, so to speak.
Really similar to lift, but a lot of times the instability comes about without the aid of a front.
Right, and that instability has a lot to do with daytime heating. When we see these spring systems, we're finally warming up our temperatures, so we get some of that instability in the mix, versus in wintertime when we have these overnight events, squall lines, and we just don't have any instability. The measuring factor of instability, we call it CAPE, convective available potential energy, and that's one of the things we look for as we get get into the spring months is, are we going to have CAPE, or is it going to go away because these lines move in overnight?
And of course, you could have a lot of these different things, but without any humidity and without any moisture, take that ingredient away and everything changes. So humidity and moisture has a lot to do with that too. And with that, we often are looking at what we call the dew points. That is the point to where the temperature would have to fall in order for the air to become saturated. And the higher the dew point, the more humid it is, the more moist it is out there. And then that's what feeds a lot of these storms as they're developing and as they move in.
Right, and when we start to see those dew points in the springtime getting above 60 or closer to 63 or 64, that is not good news, versus when we are in the earlier kind of winter months, January and February, sometimes we don't see them climbing above 55, but we track those changes in the dew points in the spring as we start to get more moisture, warmer temperatures coming off the Gulf.
Yep.
And we're watching all of those ingredients, and the Storm Prediction Center is watching those too. And so often they will issue these severe outlooks that will show us the areas that are more likely to get some type of strong storms or severe weather. And they have different colors, green, yellows, the tan colors, and even goes up into the reddish colors as well. And these are the different levels that we talk about: the level 1, level 2, level 3 of 5, level 4, or level 5 risk. So this is just in general what those colors mean. The green color is the level 1. That's the lowest risk, meaning there's a little better chance that these storms would be a little more isolated, not as many of them around, but you could have a couple of stronger storms that develop that would be short-lived with winds 40 to 60 miles an hour. It could see hail up to 1 inch in diameter, and there would be a lower tornado risk than with that. But then, Danielle, we get up to level 2 risk, and that means it comes up just a little bit, but still not anything to get overly concerned about, but you want to start paying a little more attention with that.
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to say, is that a lot of times people get caught up in those colors, and you're thinking, oh, it's yellow, that means that we're fine. We don't start worrying until we get into that pinkish color. But no, even though it's yellow, you want to make sure that you're paying close attention to that forecast, because like you said, if you have that daytime heating during the spring and then these storms are coming in overnight, the instability is there, you have to make sure that you are prepared. And that's the big thing about spring severe weather, is being prepared for these storms as they arrive. So the levels keep us level-headed. They keep us, on track with what we need to be forecasting for you guys as far as what we're looking for in the storm system. We don't necessarily come on and talk about the instability and things of that nature, but we do show you these maps so that you can prepare yourself and your family in case any of these storms happen.
So the level 1 and level 2, those are more common for us to see this time of year. But then when we get level 3 and especially 4 and 5, level 4 and 5, we don't see those here very often. Sometimes we could go a whole spring severe weather season without a level 4, and level 5 is incredibly rare, Chris. And at that point, when we get to that level 4, level 5, we're talking about likely supercell thunderstorms, maybe long-lived tornadoes, and that's when we really have to take things incredibly serious.
We could see EF4s and EF5s when we have that too. Another important thing I want to note is, I have been here a long time, we have had tornadoes before even without a slight risk.
Right.
So we just really need to be prepared at all times. We have also had a level 3 before, and things have fallen apart as they've moved in. So really this is just a guide to help us really help us tell the story, and to also help you be prepared as these storms are going to be moving into our area as well. Here is the look from month to month. Now, the important thing I want people to know is we're talking about springtime, yes. People a lot of times call it severe weather season, but here in Georgia, severe storms can happen at any time. And when I go and talk to schools, I'm like, we can have tornadoes in December, we can have tornadoes in January. In the middle of winter time, we can have tornadoes. And yes, they have happened. 125 between 1950 and 2024. In December, we've had 125 tornadoes. In January, 153. But the thing that you will notice here, the highest columns that we see are in the months of March, April, and May. That's when it's most likely time to see tornadoes here. As you go into the summertime, it goes down. We have what we call a secondary severe weather season going into the fall months. And that again is at that transition of seasons between summertime and wintertime, when we have the fall months and we have more fronts coming through that will help us with those ingredients that would give us that severe weather risk. But also in the fall, we could have tornadoes spawned by landfalling hurricanes. So really they can happen here at any time. But look at those numbers, March, April, and May. those are pretty high for some of the amount or the number of tornadoes that we can see in this season.
Especially March and April.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just think back to any recent tornado outbreak, they often happen in those 2 months of the year. So that's why it's super important, especially as you're with your families, maybe you have younger kids. They practice that tornado sheltering drill at school, but remind your family, okay, what's the difference between a watch and a warning? Watch means watch out, means we've got our ingredients for the cake, but it ain't made yet. We don't have our cake out of the oven. But a warning means you seek action. You're taking your shelter. And especially when you have younger kids, educate them on, okay, why do sometimes we have to go take shelter from storms, and where do we take shelter as well?
Exactly, and that's a big part of our severe weather talks. When we talk to students and kids that are at schools, like, okay, making it a playful, conversation, but we teach them about cumulonimbus clouds. We teach them about how storms form in those clouds, and most importantly, where you should go if one of these storms do arrive, because a lot of times people don't think about them, you know. We are doing weather all the time, so it's top of our mind, but that doesn't mean that you're at home anticipating a tornado to arrive. Right. So, during this time where we have nice weather, you have to go ahead and plan ahead to try to get, your family in the know of where should we go if there is a tornado.
And the key there is the lowest floor of your home. I'm going to go ahead and stand up and kind of point these things out. We always tell people, get in the centermost part of your home. Try to put as many walls between you and the outside as possible. In this situation, it would most likely be this closet to be one of the best places, or even in this hallway, as long as there are no windows around. But you put as many walls between you and the outside as possible. And the reason you don't want to be around any windows, now, a lot of our windows are built to withstand winds, but if you have flying debris outside, that could hit those windows and break them, and then the wind starts coming in your house and things start blowing around there. So that's why you want to get in that centermost part and stay away from those windows to try to stay away from some of that flying glass. And that's pretty much what we're saying here. When you're inside, there are some other things you can do as well when you're in your safe spot. And
if your safe spot is not in a basement, it's a low level of your house, I would also recommend a bathroom. I have been out on storm surveys and you still see the plumbing in the concrete. So bathtubs are really good places to go. And you want to protect your head and your neck, your spinal cord. So we do the duck and cover in schools. You do the same thing when you're doing your tornado drill at home. Cover your head, your neck. That could mean a helmet. It could mean you're taking a mattress and covering yourself in the bathtub, or it could mean that you're just taking some blankets to cover yourself if there is a tornado and there's some flying debris out there. Now this house also has that small little closet. And it's also interesting, some of these kind of EF2 level tornadoes, maybe EF3, they knock out some of the exterior walls or the upstairs, but those interior small little closets can still withstand those stronger winds.
Yeah, we always talk to people that have survived a tornado, and they tell you, like you can hear the winds coming and they try to get into their safe place and they might not make it and they just pop into the bathroom. Like you said, the tub, you go and you see how this tub is in perfect condition, but we know that people were really scared at this moment. But always the tub, the closet. A lot of times we tell people, your bathrooms don't usually have a lot of windows for privacy reasons, so that is always a great place for you to go. And
in this situation too, this house with the basement, that is the best place, as you mentioned. And we know that even some basements, some of a couple of walls might even have windows. Again, not in those rooms, but in that part of the basement that is pretty much underground and it does not have windows in it too. So we hope we have prepared you for springtime. Spring is a great time. Even though we've talked about a lot of the negative things with it, it is a great time as we warm up and we're able to get outside and play a little bit more. But we do know with weather, there are some things that happen in the springtime that we need to be aware of and be prepared for. So thank you guys for, I love these little weather talks that we have here. And we're going to be having a lot more here on Weather Impact 24/7 here on 11Alive Plus. So stay with us throughout the season. We will also have special updates on 11Alive Plus when we do have weather going on with extended discussions about what's happening. So thanks for joining us for this Weather Impact Extra.